Hello, class. Before we start with Chapter 1, I wanted to go through an introduction. Case management and rehabilitation counseling. I know some of you are still wondering, what is case management all about? I know that in this class, there are individuals that are enrolled in various programs within the department, but one thing you must understand about case management is something that the skill set that you acquire is transferable. It's transferable in many different ways because once you understand what the content or the details that you must enter into the case record and understand the format that is written in, and they're not written in APA, okay? That's a good thing, I'm sure, for most, right? It isn't written in APA, but once you have a general understanding, you'll be able to apply those basic skills to the different disciplines or disciplinary areas that you're in. Case management, what is it? Now, I have two videos on this particular screen that I would like for you to watch. The way that we'll do it is you have the option of copying the URL, or you can go to YouTube and put the name in, type in the title that's underneath the URL for the video. All the videos will come from YouTube, the majority of them. If there are any other places, I will definitely let you know that. But you can definitely go into YouTube. The way you'll do it is you will pause this screen, open up another URL, and go to YouTube and look at the video and then come back. Okay? So what I want you to do at this time, I want you to look at the two videos. Pause this video. Okay, now that you've had an opportunity to watch the videos, the first video was case management, and it was just case management. It's actually dealing with substance abuse and recovery, but the one thing that they mentioned in there, in that particular video, they talked about advocacy, which is a component of case management. And one thing you're doing is you're looking at the person, finding out what areas there might be some issues or deficits or whatever the word is for your particular specialty area where there is a problem and there's a way that you can assist. The one thing about rehabilitation counseling case management is that we're pretty different from most areas because we look at the whole person. We look at the person from a holistic perspective, and we'll talk about that later on. Now, the next video that you saw was why is case management so important in behavioral health treatment? I was very particular in picking that one because that particular video actually talks about uh, a behavior health setting, and that's something that some of you that are rehabilitation counseling students, some of you might find yourself working in these particular settings because rehab is transitioning into more of a clinical method that they have now, which will definitely expand your scope of practice. So it actually be a combination somewhat of clinical mental health and rehabilitation counseling, but none of you actually know where your journey is going to take you. So I encourage you to be open-minded, be flexible in your thinking, and be a scholar of the information and the knowledge that you're imparted. Okay? Case management. According to Case Management of America, case management is defined as a collaborative process of assessment, planning, facilitation, care coordination, evaluation, and advocacy for options and services to meet an individual and family's comprehensive health needs. They said family there because sometimes you will be working with families through communication and available resources to promote quality, cost-effective outcomes. Quality, cost-effective outcomes. For rehabilitation counselors, the outcome that you want if you're working with a person as a vocational rehabilitation counselor and working with them on employment, the outcome is you want for them to become successfully employed. For persons that are working independent living cases, then you want to increase their independence within their home or within the community. For persons that are working the clinical mental health cases, and those persons might have the LPC and the CRC, which is the licensed professional counselor, or the certified rehabilitation counseling certifications or license. And those individuals are able to work with them from more of a clinical perspective, but also provide services to them to help them, whether it's become employment or something of that nature. But those, when you combine the two, generally that's something that people will do in a private agency or private setting. That's something that we're moving toward. Persons that might be in some of the other areas, the outcome is what clinical mental health. You want to make sure that they are healthy, or you're trying to remediate whatever the issue, the underlying issue is. Substance abuse, we want sobriety is the case, right? So in school counseling or counseling programs, school counseling, you want to sometimes extinguish the behavior or go in and help the student adapt or work on careers, things of that nature. So, but this is what case management is described as according to the Case Management of America. Case management is also the basic concept of case management. It involves timely coordination of services to address a client's specific needs in a cost-effective manner. You are going to coordinate services. You're going to, I will say, for example, you're going to, as a rehabilitation counselor, you're going to have to look at things like their education or their training. You have to look at making sure that they are receiving the medical treatment or maintaining sobriety, or making sure that they are receiving physical therapy or things of that nature, even making sure that they're going to counseling. Anything that's going to help this individual become successfully employed. And sometimes it sounds a lot easier than it is, but I can tell you, as trying as it can be in many cases, on the other side, when you have successful cases, and sometimes when those cases are unsuccessful, and you know that you've given it your all, and your client is really appreciative because there's some issues that might happen that could contribute to the case being closed unsuccessfully. So what you will see on the other end, it's quite rewarding. It's quite rewarding. Uh, the case manager serves as an important facilitator among the client, the family or caregiver, the health team, the payer, and the community. Guiding principles for case management practice include the following. Case managers use a client-centric collaborative partnership approach, basically client-centered. You remember in your theories class, you talked about client-centered or person-centered. So we're focusing on that individual. Whenever possible, facilitate self-determination and self-care through the tenets of advocacy, shared decision-making, and education. Shared decision-making. Advocacy is something that you might do or you might model for them or help them in advocating for themselves. Shared decision-making, in all decisions that are made in reference, except for something like eligibility, but for all the services that are provided, we have to provide informed consent to individuals. Even in clinical mental health, when you're providing services for them or you're working on particular techniques, using particular techniques and theoretical approaches, those clients still have informed consent. We, at any time, they could say, well, I don't want to do that. And if you are not able to convince them as to why it would be a benefit for them to continue doing whatever it is, then you have to terminate those services, whatever it is that you're doing. Now, does this mean that, for example, with rehabilitation counseling. You have a client come in that desires to go to work as a medical doctor, but you've gotten all their evaluations, their aptitude scores, and things of that nature, and they say, well, I want to be a medical doctor, but what you have shows that the best that they can be is a CNA. That doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them and let them go to medical school and pay for them to go to medical school. That will mean that what you're going to do is offer them options and tell them what their options are. They can decide to agree with, accept what you're doing or whatever, or they can decide to go ahead and do some things on their own. They have those decisions. And you'll understand this a lot better when we get to the chapters where we're talking about vocational evaluation, we're talking about planning, services, and things of that nature. Okay? Shared decision making in education. Now, you use a comprehensive, holistic approach. Remember, I told you that rehabilitation counselors have a holistic approach. We're looking at everything. We're looking at things like how they ambulate within the community, their support systems, their families, their education, their work history. We're looking at who their doctors are, where they're receiving treatment, all of those particular things. And they practice cultural competence with awareness and respect for diversity. Cultural competency with awareness and respect for diversity. Remember, persons with disability are, uh, they're the highest number as far as these marginalized segments of diverse segments of the population. They're the largest. They're the largest from something, and according to some of the research that's out there. Now, cultural competence. What does it take for you to become culturally competent? What things must a counselor possess? They must have some awareness of their own beliefs and the beliefs, their own beliefs and their perception. They have knowledge of the other person's culture or that diverse segment that they are a part of. So you'll have these things, the awareness, and then you will work on applying that and integrating that into whatever you're working on or the individual that you're working with. So when we apply that knowledge that we know and those skills, that's working on skills development and integrating when you're integrating that information that you've learned about that culture into your practices. You also promote the use of evidence-based care as available. You've heard evidence-based practices. Evidence-based practices. These are practices that are based upon research shows that they work in particular situations. Definitely make sure that you're aware of there. Promote optimal client safety. That's one of the ethical rules that we have or the ethics that we have in place that we have to follow. Promote the integration of behavioral change, science, and principles. You're doing that a lot through evidence-based care. Link with community resources. This is paramount. Having community resources, because you're going to have individuals that will come into rehabilitation counseling facilities and they need assistance with light bills, gas bills, things of that nature, and you want to make sure that you have some resources for them. Remember, they're coming in, if you're working in rehabilitation counseling, they're trying to get jobs or find careers, because at the end of the day, if you find a career for a person, then you definitely have secured a successful placement, because that person more than likely won't return. Okay. But the thing is, you should be cognizant of what's available to individuals in the community. That for me was the best thing that I could do, have resources to help individuals. You also assist with navigating the healthcare system to achieve successful care. For example, during transitions, you're going to help with scheduling appointments. You might schedule some appointments of your own for evaluations. You're going to help them with that, and just the whole case management in general. When we talked about case management, you have the definition. You saw the video. That's just some of the things that you're going to be doing. I won't elaborate too much longer on these things because you're going to discuss them as we matriculate through the semester. Pursue professional excellence and maintain competence in practice. Competent. Make sure that you remain competent. Competent. That means, if it means going to conferences, getting continuing education credits or units, things of that nature, make sure that you maintain competence in practice. Promote quality outcomes and measurement of those outcomes. Support and maintain compliance with federal, state, local, organizational, and certification rules and regulations, those policies that are in place. Now, Case Management and Rehabilitation Counseling, Chapter 1. What I would like for you to do at this particular time, pause this video, open up another browser, and go to YouTube and either type in this URL in your browser, or type this title in to YouTube to find this particular video. Pause this video. Now that was an excellent video, which basically gives you a brief description, somewhat succinct and clear, of the duties of a rehabilitation counselor. Now, where did this all start? When did this come about? Now, rehabilitation counselors began as an occupation with the Smith-Fess Act of 1920. It originated as a result of industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. Originally, rehabilitation counselors worked with those individuals that were military. And what happened after a while, these services they were provided were expanded to include civilians. Passage of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act Amendments of 1954 increased funding supports for VR services. It also authorized training grants for universities. If you're going to be taking any type of exam, such as the CRC, you should be familiar with some of these acts, such as the Smith-Fess Act. Now, the field of rehabilitation counseling and those duties that a VR counselor perform, it's been studied extensively. Early on, the role of the VR counselor was described by some as a coordinator, not as a counselor. The VR should hire both psychological counselors and VR coordinators coordinating those services and things that they have. In these two roles now, the psychological counselor would only work with those consumers with adjustment issues, adjustment to disability, which are more psychological or emotional. The rehab coordinator, on the other hand, would find cases, do intake, assemble reports, determine eligibility, do case management, arrange services, public relations, and job placement. It was hoped that this division would resolve the role function issue that was going on between the two roles. Now, when you hear about that rehab coordinator, what does that sound like? Does that sound like that something you heard in the video about the rehabilitation counselor career? It does, right? Dividing the role into two separate job roles was referred as the two hats theory. Two hats theory. This two hats theory is because those particular duties and services the client were receiving were divided into two. Now, some propose what was called the big hat theory, which sounds a lot more like what's going on today as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. This view of the role and function of the counselor described the VR counselor as a service provider that worked with the whole person. That's where we get that word holistic approach. The VR counselor must have multiple behavioral competencies coupled with comprehensive knowledge base. The argument between the two hat theory and the big hat theory continued. Research has been conducted that focus on reports of what the counselors say they do or on observations of what they actually do. Most VR counselors estimate that their time is roughly divided into thirds. Now, I will tell you this before I move to the next slide. There have been numerous desk studies, studies that they call desk, where people came and observed the tasks that rehabilitation counselors were completing and were doing. Those things have changed over time, just a little bit. Uh, and but when we look at the overarching roles or different areas, they pretty much have stayed the same. Another study looked at the counselor's role. One third of the counselor's time is devoted to counseling. They indicated that one third of the counselor's time is divided among clerical work, planning, recording, job placement. One third of the counselor's time is divided among professional growth, public relations, reporting, resource development, travel, and supervisory duties. What I'd like for you to do at this particular point is to pause this lecture and get your textbook. I want you to go to page 7 of the text, case management task, and I want you to look at the tables that they have in there. Table 1.1 is case management, which talks about intake, interviewing, service coordination, case records and reports. There's also table 1.2, which is vocational assessment and counseling. And vocational counseling is listed also as part of table 1.2. Looking at the assessment and you're looking at the counseling task, they're broken down. And also in table 1.3 is effective counseling, and table 1.4 is job placement. I want you to read all of those tasks that are listed underneath. I think that will help you in developing your idea and your perception of what case management looks like in rehabilitation counseling. Pause the video. Okay, now you've had an opportunity to look at some of those tasks. Does it look like something that you could do? You think so? Alrighty. And for some of you, you can see where some of the skills are transferable to your particular programs that you're in, those that aren't in rehabilitation counseling. Alrighty. Now, there are other studies on the role and function of the counselor, reports that counselors say they spend the greatest amount of time in face-to-face contact with the consumer. Face-to-face contact with the consumer, and that was in all of those things that you just looked at in those tables where you're looking at job placement, effective counseling, you're looking at, well, the vocational assessment, they don't spend that much time generally with them. Vocational counseling, they will do. Uh, so some of those things, those tasks that you read about, that case management, face to face, case management includes it all, but face to face, you'll spend it's according to what your quota is and the number of cases, a number of people you have to see, number of cases you have to have active in your caseload, and it varies by state. I've worked in Louisiana and I've worked in Texas as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, and it was a little different, very different as far as the quota. So, in order for me to reach my goal, which was to close so many cases successfully each year, I had to spend a substantial amount of time doing face-to-face, which affected my ability to document, enter case notes. I had to finally come to a place to where I had to have some balance. And as I continued to work in the field and moved from what a novice level to somewhat of an expert level, I was able to find that balance in between. And you will too. You will too. Additional research found that face-to-face time emphasized the exchange of specific information more than counseling. Hmm. Another interesting study using the personal styles inventory reported that VR counselors' personality styles resemble those of either a case manager or a therapist. Hmm, think so? Now, they possess the core characteristics that influence their work with persons with disabilities. These characteristics include interest in helping others and a desire to use their abilities to help persons with disabilities achieve significant life outcomes. So that was another study that was done. The VR counselor's mission includes an array of counseling and case management services that result in the enhanced quality of life for persons with disability. Quality of life, enhancing, making better. Now, when people judge their quality of life, they compare what they have with what they believe they desire. Now, that's very subjective there. And I found just based upon anecdotal experience when I was working with individuals, some individuals that came in and had a source of income such as Social Security disability income, and they had some housing or something of that nature, those individuals were focused more on training. The individuals that did not have their own or were living and the income that they were receiving from Social Security wasn't enough to cover their expenses each month. They were just interested in getting a job. And I have to think about those things when I'm working with them because am I doing my client a disservice by just finding a job because versus helping them find a career? I might be, but at the end of the day, they have informed choice. So some I helped get jobs, some I worked on helping them find careers. Moving on, research indicates that most of the adults in this country express a high quality of life. In contrast, those with disability rates their quality of life lower than those persons without a disability. Now, to influence a person's quality of life positively, counselors must provide high quality case management, vocational assessment, vocational counseling, effective counseling, and job placement services. I want you to pause the video right now and go to your book and look at these particular items that are listed here when they're talking about quality of life. I had you go look at the tables and look at the tasks. Go back and read what each one of these items listed here, such as quality, case management, vocational assessment. Go back and look at these effective counseling and job placement services. Go back and read up the information that tells you and give you a definition of what each of these particular things are. So pause this video, go and read that. Now that you have an idea of what these particular services are, we can move forward because the primary goal of many branches of healthcare is to add years to life. The primary goal of rehabilitation services is adding life to years. Catch it? The primary goal of healthcare is to add years to life. the primary goal of rehabilitation services is to adding life to years. So we're looking at enhancing that quality of life or living. Now, research on the role and function of the counselor has provided two significant conclusions. VR counselors have a diverse work role. They spend less time in counseling and guidance than in completing paperwork. Mm, mm, paperwork, case management. And I know that that is true until you find that healthy balance. But the wonderful thing that's happened since these particular studies, government has been looking more at streamlining, and more states are looking at streamlining, having less paper. So they have gotten some electronics case management systems in place. Every state has one. They'll use software such as Aware or something of that nature. And it gives you an opportunity that sometimes when you're talking with the client or the consumer, whichever word they use, that you're able to go ahead and document things right there simultaneously as you're speaking with this individual, instead of having to write things down on paper, then go write up this beautiful case note and all of that. Sometimes you're able to do both of those. It might take a little more time when you start trying to do this, where you're capturing information from them and entering it into the system at the same time. It might be a little stressful and might take a little more time, but as you continue to practice it, you will get better. A national study of VR counselors found that counselors rated case recording as a very significant part of their job. And I will say that, yes, that's true, because we have to document, 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 document. If you don't document it, it didn't happen. Remember that. In these studies, counselors rated the following activities as highly important parts of their jobs: write case note summaries and reports so that others can understand the case, compile and interpret client information to maintain a current case record, document, 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 because you might leave that position one day and someone else has to come and pick that case up. Or that case may have to be reviewed for congressional hearing or something of that nature, where a client has complained and they've gone to the federal level, and now we have the federal government involved. Or you have state government where you have your director. Sometimes those cases will be reviewed and they have to be submitted to the manager and the director for approval. So you want to make sure that you're reporting things, but you don't want to put too much and write it like you're writing a manuscript for an APA format. But you definitely want to make sure that you have all the necessary information in there. And if it's definitely anything that you're spending money on, if you have a conversation with the client and they indicate they want to change something, document, document, document it. Don't just make an assumption that the person picking it up will know. The book identified four core competency areas and associated knowledge and skills required by rehabilitation counselors. You can go to page 17 in your book. Those competencies are listed there. Competency number 1, demonstrate knowledge of career development across the lifespan, with particular attention to how a disability may affect vocational choices, goals, and performance. Remember your lifespan, human lifespan and development. Also, you had your career, vocational careers course, which talks about career development over the lifespan. Now, when we're talking about that, know how career choices can be moderated or influenced by disability factors in order to be able to design interventions that specifically address these factors. Also, be able to design specific career interventions to facilitate choice and decision making based on relevant career theories. Relevant career theories. The next competency, understanding the world of work and how specific aspects are related to people with disabilities. You must be able to identify the job search and job development approaches that are most effective in securing employment. Also, be aware of legislation, including that related to Social Security and civil rights, that may influence decisions regarding work for people with psychiatric illnesses. There are some laws out there that might affect that. Three, the third competency is develop effective methods of educating consumers and families to effectively navigating the vocational rehabilitation system. Educating them on that by maintaining an understanding of the vocational rehabilitation system and its interrelationships with the mental health service delivery system. Monitor changes and trends. Keep yourself abreast of those. Eligibility requirements and funding within the vocational rehabilitation system. The fourth competency is understanding the effects of the disability and its relationships to employment-related activities and outcome. Understanding that stigma that's attached to it. You must be aware of the effects of language and terminology have on the business community. I've seen that change. Recognize the existence of stigmatization or stigmatizing behavior and attitudes by professionals within the human service field and their implications for service delivery, including disclosure of disability. Disclosure of disability, a person doesn't have to disclose. That's their right. Now, before we move on to the next topic, case management and as is defined, a collaborative process which assesses, plans, implements, coordinates, monitors, and evaluates options and services to meet an individual's health needs through communication and available resources to promote quality, cost-effective outcomes. The next portion of this particular lecture, we're looking at burnout. Burnout. We're going to move through this one rather quickly, but I have a video that I would like for you to look at. It's called Burnout Causes, Symptoms, and Treatment. It talks about how stress affects the body and how it causes burnout and some of the symptoms and how you can treat it. So you pause this particular video, open up another URL, and go to YouTube and look at this particular video. Pause. Now that you're back, now you've heard some of the causes and the symptoms. Are you able to relate to any of that? I'm sure some of you can. I'm sure some of you can. If you haven't, then, or you can't relate to any of them, just give it time. Burnout does happen, but Dr. Maiden always talks about self-care, taking care of you. Not too much, but self-care. Because there's two things you want to make sure that you do. You want to remain competent and you want to take care of self. Now, the problem of burnout. What is burnout? An imbalance between the psychological resources of an individual and the demands being made on those resources. When we're given more than we get, we burn out. A common pitfall in our work, very common. We provide services based on our thoughts, feelings, and energy to an often challenging clientele. How do you know you're burning out? You may have an inkling when you drag yourself into work most days. Find yourself repeating the same interpretations over and over. Give advice to as a shortcut rather than helping clients learn and grow. Begin sessions late and or end early. Doze off or space out during sessions. Here are some other things, such as do things that would make your former ethics professor cringe. We don't want to do that. Feel relieved when clients canceled. self-disclose in ways that don't help the client. We don't self-disclose anything that would not be beneficial to the services we're providing, and it's beneficial to the client. Just be very careful with self-disclosure. I generally tell people don't until you get to at an expert level and you know what you're doing. Um, Several factors that contribute to rehabilitation counselor burnout have been identified in the literature as extensive client contact, caseload responsibilities, and negative case outcomes. Counselors must constantly decide which of their competing job demands to attend to next. Because of large caseloads with many consumers who need attention over long periods of time, counselors are never able to complete all the necessary tasks for all their consumers. Research indicates that the larger the caseload, the more exhausted a counselor feels. Another source of tension has been labeled as the futility syndrome. No matter how much the counselor wants a client to succeed, some will only have minimal prospects for long-term success in the VR program. Now, one element existing within the rehabilitation counselor's job has been identified as quantity versus quality dilemma. Can someone tell what that is? Do you know what it is now that you think about it? Just looking at it, quantity versus quality. Okay, I'll tell you. The system pressures counselors to rapidly accumulate their quota on successful closures. As a result, an employment rather than optimal employment becomes the outcome goal, getting a job versus helping individuals find a career. Okay? If you have any questions, please place them in Ask the Instructor discussion board or email me. Thank you.